Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for August 8th, 2026. Today, we're going to take a look at what is happening in the tropics as things are beginning to escalate. We now have two new disturbances tagged by the National Hurricane Center just today. However, if you've been following me for the last few days, you would know that this is not a surprise, as the models for some time now have been hinting at potential uptick in MDR activity as we head into August. And it looks like the fruits of that are now beginning to show. But there are also some other areas we need to watch, including the Eastern Pacific, where we might have a potential threat to Hawaii within the next week. And I know there always sometimes tends to be those long-range signals and those long-range threats, which more often than not don't verify, but the models, especially the long-range ensembles, and I think I'll show you the GFS operational later on, they are showing that something might develop and track in the direction of Hawaii. So it's safe to say we have a lot on today's menu in terms of what is going on in the tropics. So with that being said, let's get started, shall we? First off, as we always do every single video, with the National Hurricane Center Tropical Weather Bulletin, and as of the 2 p.m. bulletin, which came out roughly about a half hour ago, we have two disturbances here in the Atlantic, two distinct tropical waves that we are monitoring, and both of these AOIs were tagged today, and both of them have a low chance of development right now, although I definitely think at least one of these chances here will probably go up in the next few days, maybe both of them, since there is actually decent model support for both of these areas here, although this eastern disturbance has a little bit of a higher chance right now at a 30% chance. But either way, we definitely are watching both of these disturbances here, and more than likely we won't get anything strong or anything crazy out of either of these areas. But in terms of potential impacts to the Caribbean, I wouldn't rule any out, and I'll show you why I say that in just a little bit. But moving on to the Pacific as well, also starting to get really active too, and we've also talked about this being the case for at least a few days now. We have three areas to watch right now. The first one, though, back to the west here, now at a high chance of development in the next 7 days at 70%. And this one is the one that I think we will potentially need to watch for potential impacts to Hawaii here. Again, the long-range models are hinting at this will generally move in the direction of Hawaii, but we know how the case goes as we get closer to time. Sometimes, either the storm completely falls apart or it ends up shifting to the south or to the north. It's really hard to get an actual impact on the Hawaiian Islands for some reason. It doesn't really happen often, but the models are showing a long-range threat yet again. So we will be keeping an eye out on this area here very closely. But there is other development chances besides that as well. There's a moderate chance to the east of that, and then a low chance for development as well to the east of that. So it's safe to say that the Pacific is also starting to get active as well. I mean, the entire tropics are starting to get active, and obviously that is to be expected given that we are now in the month of August, and both basins typically start to get active around this time. Here's a satellite shot of what is happening across the Atlantic basin right now, and you can see we are definitely starting to get a little bit more active here in the eastern Atlantic with our tropical waves. Looks like we have one here in the western MDR closer to the Caribbean, and this is probably going to move through in about a day or so. And as the typical song and dance goes with these tropical waves, we're going to more than likely get gusty winds and heavy rain, and let's see, hopefully this will maybe last a decent bit throughout the Caribbean, because I know there's probably lots of places in the Caribbean right now that are dealing with drought conditions or lack of rainfall, but that is all thanks to the El Nino, which is suppressing conditions for tropical waves, by shearing them off, and also being choked off by dry air, which is still an issue right now. So we do kind of have a little bit of a fragile environment here for potential development in the Atlantic, but the chances are there nonetheless, and especially once we are now really starting to see things light up here in the eastern MDR, now that we are progressing further into August. As I've been saying for at least a few days now, I think it's only a matter of time before at least one of these waves break through and develop. And elsewhere in the Atlantic, we obviously have as well the cloud covers here, or these thunderstorms off the southeast coast, and that's going to bring impacts in terms of thunderstorms and gusty winds. Nothing more than that, except maybe some rainfall, maybe some, minor flooding here to the southeast, seeing some convection blow up over northern Florida and Georgia right now, and that's probably going to be the case as well for the Carolinas here throughout the rest of the weekend. There are a few ensembles that are trying to take some of this energy and maybe try to spin up here in the subtropics as this moves on off to the east over the coming days, but is not likely. But you know what? I guess why not if something will try to develop here out of this, since it will be moving out to sea anyways. But our main chances more than likely will come out of the MDR here, at least over the next week. And taking a look at the tropical waves we have right now, again, one here near the Caribbean, and then we have two in the central and eastern MDR right now as the tropical wave train continues to get more active. We also have some waves that make it to the eastern Pacific as well, and obviously that happens as these waves generally move in a east to west direction, and sometimes we get them sheared off in the Caribbean, and sometimes they can try to reignite further west, or they just move on into the eastern Pacific and eventually develop there. But definitely quite a few tropical waves active in the Atlantic right now. And taking a look at Africa, probably more waves to come, and this is especially why we are really watching and monitoring the tropics here over the next few weeks, and as to why it really is looking like things are going to start getting active in the Atlantic. The tropical wave train continues to fire off. Obviously, we have seemingly one here that is also just on the verge of coming off the coast of Africa, and then another one that's back to the east of that. And I think either one of these waves are probably the main signal that a lot of the models are looking at for potential development here, especially further back to the east over the next few days. So we'll have to watch either one of these waves here. That'll probably be our wave, but I think it's probably this one here, as it especially looks pretty beefy right now. But then looking back further to the east of that, over eastern Africa, where our tropical waves truly originate. They start over eastern Africa as they, get enhanced by whatever rising air we have in the Indian Ocean. Well, that tends to be the pattern in active years. This year, we kind of don't have that, but our tropical wave train, admittedly, still looks pretty decent right now, and there's, again, some energy already beginning to fire up as well over eastern Africa, and that's going to obviously move west here over the next week or so, and maybe we'll see if eventually a week or two down the line, long-range models begin to pick up on either one of these pieces of energy, or maybe anything else that might come beyond that. But Africa, too, starting to get active, and absolutely a sign of the fact that we are in August and we are closing in here on the peak of the hurricane season. And obviously we'll be continuing to watch these waves as they progress further west and eventually make it out into the MDR. So, moving on to the models now, what do they show today? Starting off here with the European AI ensemble, and I really have to give it to the European AI ensembles because they were probably the first model in the long range to really hint at MDR activity as we got towards around the first or second week of August, which we are now in. And now that we are in the second week of August here, well, they clearly still show development, and quite a decent amount of development too. There's obviously the first signal here, which is further to the west, which you see kind of gets going and maybe dives into the Caribbean. And then we have the second wave here, further back to the east, which also develops as well. And then some ensembles here maybe try to take it, and we maybe could see this eastern wave move north and try to survive in the subtropics for a little bit. And then there's also a little bit of a signal as well from the subtropics, which comes from the energy here off the east coast, which I mentioned. So the ensembles definitely looking active here over the next week to 2 weeks. And you can even see, once we get towards the end of the frame, some more energy beginning to come off the coast of Africa, which the models are also aggressive on as well. And I think this is very important that we're seeing quite a bit of activity still on the European AI, because sometimes what happens is, when the models when the models show development here in the MDR very long range, sometimes they will be very aggressive far out until the tropical wave that they are hinting at moves off the coast of Africa, and then suddenly all the models downtrend on activity, and we don't really see much come out of it. And so far, that has not happened yet. And it still could happen. We could still see that occur. And, as I mentioned before, conditions here in the tropical Atlantic will still be very fragile. There's going to be a lot of dry air to the north, and especially as this gets further west here, as we run into the wind shear wall thanks to El Nino, that'll also be an impact as well that could potentially inhibit any development from these waves, but maybe not in the eastern Atlantic, though. Maybe the shear will be less enough that we will still probably get at least whatever eastern feature here to develop. But in general, the tropics looking pretty active here over the next few days. And moving on to the GFS model as well, the 12Z run is out, and let's see what they show. And, well, they also have two signals here. The first one is further off to the west, and that seems to get going around roughly 4 to 5 days out. And I find this signal here especially interesting because I actually talked about this on Twitter last night, that it looks like the models were beginning to uptrend on this signal yesterday. And we also see that happen with these tropical waves sometimes. When they initially move off the coast of Africa, models are not really at first aggressive on them, but usually over the next few days, sometimes, with these signals that do sometimes come out of the blue and spin up really quickly, sneak up on us, the models suddenly uptrend on them. And that's kind of seems like that's what happened here with this western feature a little bit. And if this western area does form, I will say that could potentially be a little bit interesting, especially for the Lesser Antilles here over the next week, since that will more than likely move straight on off to the west. But obviously, again, we will definitely deal with lots of wind shear here, which will be very strong, especially once this enters the Caribbean. So as soon as that happens, you can see very clearly, something just completely dies off here. But we also have the other wave behind it as well, and that's really the main thing that the models are hinting at being our, main signal, which is very likely to develop. But we have the GFS on board as well here with development over the next few days, and in general, multiple of the operational models. The European 2 also hinting at development, and they mainly show the second wave here further to the east develop. But we have the GFS and the European on board, and most of the other regular operational models as well. So I definitely have reason to believe here that within the next week, we will more than likely get something to develop here out of the MDR. And what about the environmental conditions? Let's see how that'll pan out here, because obviously, if anything doesn't develop, it will be due to the environmental conditions that we have out here, since things are still fragile after all. And probably the number one biggest factor that I could point to is the dry air here, especially in the eastern MDR, and we definitely have quite a bit of it further to the north. And let me zoom in here closely on the MDR, and you could see definitely still quite a bit of dry air to the north. The Saharan air plumes are still coming off pretty aggressively here, as we typically still see in early August, and obviously the dry air as well being enhanced by the El Nino. But I will say these tropical waves, at least on the GFS, do seem to be at a low latitude enough that they're kind of receiving and getting moisture pumped into them from the ITCZ here, which tends to be in the southern Atlantic. And that's what's kind of giving these waves a little bit of a boost. So as long as these waves stay more on the southern end and try to shield them off, and try to stay shielded off as much as possible from the dry air to the north, I'd say that we more than likely will see at least one of these tropical waves spin up here over the next weekend. We probably will be in just a few days looking at our next named storm of the hurricane season. And then shear-wise as well, shear is not really going to be as big of an issue here in the MDR. It's mainly once we get towards the Caribbean here where you can see we have much stronger upper level, westerly winds, again, thanks to El Nino and the general strong upper level westerly wind pattern that we have there. But the shear won't be very strong in the MDR. Mainly the biggest issue that we are watching for that would potentially inhibit development would be dry air in this case. But sea surface temperatures, how are they looking like? And very interestingly, sea surface temperatures here in the eastern Atlantic and in general throughout the MDR running above normal. And especially here in the eastern MDR off the coast of Africa, things have definitely been warming up and are even getting well above normal here. Even seeing some anomalies here as much as 2 degrees Celsius above normal in the eastern MDR. And I've talked about this as well over the last few weeks. The eastern Atlantic has been warming up quite a decent bit. And it's especially interesting that this is happening now that we are getting into August and we are getting closer to the peak of the hurricane season. Because if you remember earlier on in the season, lots of people were saying that we kind of had this cooler pattern here in the eastern MDR, much more of a negative AMO look, which would potentially only help the Atlantic be even more suppressed by the record strong El Nino that we have churning out here in the eastern Pacific. But that is definitely no longer the case. Sea surface temperature anomalies in the eastern Atlantic have warmed up quite significantly, and I've been saying this, but I do think maybe that might provide a little bit of resistance from the Atlantic, that at least once we get towards the peak of the hurricane season, which again we are literally just about 2 or 3 weeks away from at most, we will definitely see some decent activity here. And certainly the fact that we have overall warmer than normal sea surface temperatures across the MDR certainly as well helping with development here as well in the Atlantic. So interesting things to happen, and looks like the Atlantic is starting to wake up here in short order, and the peak of the hurricane season once again is also coming very soon. So an interesting pattern setting up there as well. But also having to talk about the Pacific as well. I mean, we've been covering this for the last few months. We're record warm sea surface temperature anomalies are very widespread throughout the Pacific Basin right now, obviously mainly in part due to the El Nino here, and that will also play a role over the next week or so more than likely. And I want to show you here on the GFS as we get towards around sometime next week, and I'm focusing specifically on the Central Pacific because that is where probably our main area of interest is right now. And you can see here we have a system that will more than likely develop in the Central Pacific, which has actually not gotten a homegrown named storm so far yet. So if we do get development here, this might very well be the first homegrown system of the Central Pacific, because it's a little complicated, but the Central Pacific is actually kind of its own basin, and they even have their own tropical names as well. So we're probably going to get that here over the next week. But that's besides the point. What I do want to show you is, especially once we get towards next weekend, Saturday and Sunday, notice that we have something here that tracks in the general direction of Hawaii. And in fact, the GFS here on this model run showing that whatever system that does develop here in the Central Pacific actually will track directly over the island of Hawaii, and honestly seems like a pretty decent storm as well that makes an impact on them. And obviously, as I've said before, we'll have to see whether or not this actually verifies, because the models always do this in the long range. They'll show a storm that is particularly interesting and might get very close to the island of Hawaii, but usually once we get closer in time, we typically see either a southerly shift in track and we end up seeing the storm miss just to the south, or a northerly shift, or sometimes we end up getting a wall of shear or something like that, which ends up completely, getting rid of the storm before it brings any significant impact to the island. It's just very hard to get a direct impact on Hawaii. It's almost as if they have a shield protecting them, and I say that, kind of as a joke. A lot of people say that Florida, especially eastern Florida, kind of tends to have this hurricane shield around it. Well, I'd say Hawaii has the strength of the Florida shield times 10. And so we'll see whether or not that, ends up getting activated here over the next week, as we might potentially have a threat. But either way, since the models are showing something for them, we will be keeping a very close eye out on the potential for impacts to Hawaii here over the next week. And we will see, do the models continue to show what they show now, or do they do what typically happens and we see a shift to the south or a shift to the north, or, the whole entire situation ends up going completely in the drain. We will see. But one thing is for sure, the tropics are definitely beginning to heat up. And again, it's all par for the course as we are now in the month of August. With that being said, though, that's going to wrap it up for today's tropical weather outlook. Lots to keep an eye out on here for the next few days. So obviously we will be continuing to do these daily updates, and obviously we'll continue to do these updates pretty much till the end of the hurricane season here. That's been my goal this entire time, but especially now that we have things to actually watch out here over the next few days, you'll definitely want to make sure you are, staying tuned to the channel. And by doing that, you can subscribe, especially if you haven't already done so. Like this video, comment any questions you have as well. I'll definitely be sure to answer them. And also follow me on Twitter too for updates there on the tropics as well. And I tend to post on Twitter more, especially doing multiple posts throughout the day as well, kind of, giving you updates, especially if there's any interesting model run or something like that. So make sure to follow me on Twitter as well, at Danilo Evangelista, the same name that I have here on YouTube. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your weekend. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. I'll be back with more tomorrow.